Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Well, we finally got our global original this week, and it didn't turn out to be a Fest unit, and it wasn't Summer Helena, but instead we have a new version of Jayden, and that is the Stag of the Beach Summer Jayden. Now, when Gumi said that they wanted to have more units like Jayden in the game, I think that most of us out here, thought that another version of Jayden was maybe just a bit too on the nose there, but, here we are. I will say though that he looks great. They did an amazing job on his design, and he's definitely been working hard on that beach body. Now I know that this is coming a day late, after his release, but these original units that we have no foresight into are kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is very exciting to get something that is completely brand new into the game, but on the other hand, we don't have that data and experience from the Japanese side to kind of get a gauge on the unit and its capabilities beforehand. So I really wanted some time to digest his kit and play around with the unit a little bit. I did pull him yesterday and it was relatively painless, so that was really good. And I really wanted to do that to kind of get a real good feel about what this unit is capable of and kind of see what he could do. That said, this latest 100 cost unit is a wind element unit, and he is boasting a kit very similar in many ways to his original light version. Is he going to be worth your hard-earned Visior though? That is the question. So let's dive into his kit here today and let's see what he is all about. And as we do, let's start with Jayden's TMR. The base stats on this item are definitely not all that compelling. The magic value on this piece is definitely less than some other accessories that we've seen in the game. And I think I definitely would have liked to have seen agility on this item as well. Now, I do like the effect that comes on this one. It does have a party buff of 20 missile res penetration in addition to 40% magic. And that missile res penetration is not something that we've seen before, available as a party buff on a TMR. So it is very unique and good for that reason. Now, in terms of Summer Jayden, I do think that this is a situational use kind of item. As we'll kind of see as we get into the skills overview, Jayden actually does have a very similar buff to this one here, only it gives spirit penetration in lieu of that missile res penetration. So I think when you're setting up your auto team, you're going to have to make some choices there in terms of which buff is going to be more beneficial for you and your party. Because certainly with a ranged missile unit, it is very difficult to get in more than one buff on a map. It is certainly nice to have this kind of in the toolkit though, and have that option to get even more missile res penetration if you need it. All right, looking next at Jayden's mastery here, and we're kind of staying on theme with the TMR, and notably he's getting a 20 base missile penetration here as well. Not a huge surprise here, we've been seeing more and more missile res penetration creeping into the game, and this unit, as we'll begin to see, is kind of the culmination of that. It's definitely one of his main themes. Now moving on into Jayden's stats, his HP here is definitely a bit below average, but it is decent actually for a ranged unit, and it is actually a little bit higher than his light version, who has just over 3000 HP. Now, my biggest area of concern when I look at this stat block is definitely that low-end magic total. You can see for both base and innate values, he is well below average. Now, I think you might be surprised to hear that his base value at 349 is actually a bit higher than his light version. The light version of Jayden actually only has 325 base magic. The main difference here is that this wind version of Jayden just doesn't have anything boosting up his magic on his board, so it really makes him fall behind when we look at his total innate value for magic. So I will say, this is definitely not a good start when we start to think about what his damage potential is going to be. Let's see if he can make up for it in other ways though. Now looking at the rest of his stats here, the rest of it is actually pretty good, especially that dex value, which is among the top class in the game. That dex is considered into the damage scaling of his attacks as well, so it does help offset the lack of magic there just a little bit. Now otherwise, his luck and accuracy are all just above the average values for UR units. Now Jayden does have access to an accuracy passive as well, which can get him up to a pretty nice innate value of 193. Now defensively, there's really not a lot of good to report on this unit. He's really not picking up any defensive characteristics from his board or his mastery, so he is coming in at just 2 defense and 0 spirit innately. He does get 2 pretty good resistances with the 15 slash and 20 missile resistance. Aside from that though, it is pretty lackluster. We're looking at a -10 to pierce and strike, 2 damage types that the ice element is very strong with, and he is just neutral to magic damage. Now, I know a lot of people have definitely been kind of focused on that lower end magic total, and it's definitely a concern. But I think what we're beginning to see here, with this mastery and that missile res penetration, that's definitely going to be a theme for this unit, and it definitely has the potential to sort of flip the script there in terms of his damage potential. So let's just sort of hold that thought for now, and we'll come back to it later. Now, looking at his passives, we do have a couple of ways that we can go with this unit. I think his Ruler's Resolve passive is one that you're probably going to be wanting to have on in almost all situations. That is going to give a boost to that magic total that we've been talking so much about. It is also going to give him 40 spirit penetration to go along with that missile res penetration that we were mentioning. And it does also reduce his AP consumption by 20%, which I think is pretty important for this unit. Now, adding to that, I would opt for customized parts for that range increase, I think in almost all situations. There may be some maps where you don't end up needing it, but considering the lack of defensive capability that this unit has, I think you're definitely going to be wanting to keep this unit as far back as possible. Now, for the next two builds, you really have to make a choice. Do you need that Ruler's Resolve or do you need that added range? And that's really the question, because in order to take another passive, you will need to trade one of those out. And it is a pretty tough choice, but essentially you would trade one of those initial passives for either the Scholarly Intuition passive, which it would be kind of for an all-out accuracy build, or you would go for Knowledge Reserves for that 200 cast time reduction. And that one is kind of interesting because he does have the Scholar Subjob, and there is some spells in there with some long cast times. So specifically, this would give you a path for Jayden to get his Law of Geo-Absorption skill down to maybe a 2-tick cast in best case scenario. I do think that both of those options are very niche and situational, but something to sort of keep in mind and keep in your back pocket if you need them. Now, in terms of Jayden's counter abilities, the new one that he gets in his job is pretty interesting, and that is the King Goes First, kind of aptly named because this is a preemptive counter. Now, there is actually two things that I've discovered in my initial testing with Jayden, and unfortunately, this one is subject to line of sight and friendly fire restrictions, as many other gunner skills are. So it will hit teammates and potentially kill them or be blocked by obstacles that could be in the way. So it definitely does lessen the value of this counter just a little bit. I do think that it is quite good though, and it has a very high chance of going off at a 30% base chance as well. Now, the other nice thing on this counter is that the range on it can be increased with his passive +2 range up or an active range increase as well. So if you have an external buff for his range, in addition to that passive, you can get this up to a 7 total range, which is very, very nice. So I will say, this counter is incredibly dangerous, in its total range that it could get up to. But at the same time, it is very trick or treat. You could preemptively kill the guy that's trying to kill you, or you could clip your teammate and kill them. In my initial testing so far, if you are able to keep good spread on your team, it hasn't been too much of a problem for me yet, but something to definitely keep an eye on. Despite those issues with it, I do think that the risk versus reward could potentially be worth it with this counter ability. We'll just have to sort of play around with it more and see. I think it also depends on whether you're talking manual play or auto play. Obviously, in a manual situation, you have more control over where your units are and how they're spaced. In autoplay, though, if your units are clumped together, that's obviously more of an issue there. And in that case, you may look to something like his damage distribution from Arithmetician instead. All right, guys, so let's move into Jayden's main job skills here. And we're going to start first with his buffs. And his self buff is called Can't Beat This Heat. And it is a 40% magic and 40 spirit penetration buff. So this buff, along with his passive ability, is going to make it very easy for him to ignore spirit entirely. That 40% magic bump is very nice too. Not quite as good as the light Jayden's 60% magic buff, but I think that spirit penetration is definitely going to help make up for that, and especially against tankier high spirit targets, it's definitely going to increase his damage potential quite a bit. Now, looking at his party buff here next, this one is called Suns Out, Guns Out. I think they did a great job naming these skills. They're pretty fun. And this one is giving a 25% agility buff to the team. At the same time, it is giving Jayden himself a 5% auto restore for his AP. Now, from what I've seen in a full build, Jayden will have in the neighborhood of 250 AP. He is quite high in that category. So you can expect to get somewhere in the 12 to 13 AP per tick range with this ability equipped. That is on top of the 16 base AP that you would get just from using this buff. So I think when you factor all that in, you are getting a pretty considerable amount of AP from using this skill, especially if you have a high amount of acquired AP built up on Jayden. I do think it potentially could be enough to get him by without using something like Ziz's Bells, especially if you are able to get more than one buff in. If you are in a situation where you're only able to get one buff in, you could run into some AP issues there and may have to fall back on maybe some auto attacks in that situation. All right, looking at Jayden's attacks here next, and his low AP, low damage skill is a range 5 with a range height of 1. It has that low 121% mod, and this one has one effect on it, and that's going to be to decrease the AP of any target by 15. Nothing amazing here, on this one, but it does have the potential to turn the tide if it is able to knock somebody down low enough in their AP that they have to start using auto attacks there instead. So I think it's a fine enough, low AP skill. His second skill is called Midsummer Sniper. And this is a range 5 with a range height of 1. It has a large 200% modifier. After the damage, it is coming in with a general dispel, so that is going to remove any buffs or haste from the unit. This one is also a guaranteed 100% hit ability on top of that, so definitely a great option to have in his kit. Just like his light version, it is limited in that range height with just a range height of 1. It does have that large modifier on it though to help make up for it, which is quite a bit more potent than the light Jayden's version. His third skill here is called Splash Shower, and this is a range 4 with an additional 2 on the area of effect. Along with that, it has a range height of 4 with a +1 on the AoE. This one is coming in with a 165% mod, and this is going to completely seal and nullify counter abilities for 3 turns. It is coming in with that large diamond area of effect, but it is a quite expensive skill at 40 AP. Remember though that Jayden does have that passive for a 20% reduced AP consumption, so that will pull this one down to a 32 AP cost for him if he has that equipped. Now this skill is very similar actually to Setia's Thermal Exposure. Her skill though does drop the healing power of anybody caught in that by 40 as well. So in that regard, maybe it would have been nice to see a little bit more utility here on Jayden's version. Still a nice skill nonetheless. Setia doesn't have access to 200% modifiers, so I guess that is the trade-off here, between the two units. All right, Jayden's fourth attack here is called Maelstrom Jet, and this one is a range 5 with a range height of 4, and this one does have another 200% mod on it, so nice to have access to 2 different large modifiers. And this is a single target ability, and it will decrease the healing power of the target by 50. Decent enough high damage skill here. I think again we're trading off the additional damage potential here with the large modifier in lieu of what we've seen on maybe some other units that have maybe just a lower medium mod but have a couple of different effects tied into the skill. Healing power can definitely be a very nice debuff, especially if you're able to get this onto a tank or the frontline unit and sort of reduce the incoming healing that they're able to get. Now, last but not least, we have Jayden's Limit Burst here, and this one is up to a range 5 and up to a range height of 2, and it does come in with that cross area of effect. This one is coming in with a single debuff, and it has a 67% chance to slow anybody that it hits. Now, this LP definitely makes this unit extremely dangerous. That slow effect is a game changer, especially when you're able to get that off onto multiple enemies like you're able to with this one with that cross AoE. So I do like this Limit Burst quite a bit. I think that it will make this unit very scary kind of facing off in battle. Now, noticeably absent in the kit here for Jayden is that we don't have access to any sort of barrier break. We don't have any imperils or other breaks or utility here. No chain attacks or ability to dispel, protect, or shell. So I think that is sort of the drawback with this unit. He does have some damage potential here with his larger modifiers and big AoEs. I think understanding those limitations is pretty important because that's going to help you build your team in order to complement him with other units that might be able to bring those sort of utility, but also important in being able to go up and face this unit and understanding what those limitations are and how you can exploit them and build your team to counterpick against him. All right, moving into Jayden's Subjobs. Now his main job sub, Beachside Stag, is going to bring him 2 more attacks, and these are interesting enough. In terms of autoplay though, the only case where he'd be looking to use this silencing shot, would be if you disable the higher damaging abilities that he has available to him, or maybe you just lacked the AP to use one of those higher damaging skills. I could see some use though for the second one, Piercing Ray. This one does have the advantage of having no dead zone on it there. You can see that he's able to hit all tiles even directly adjacent to him. And this one is actually very similar to a skill that we'll see in the future on Alaya. It is a potential AoE option for him though, because this is a piercing skill and it will go through the first target and hit any units that are directly behind them. So these skills are fine enough. I think there may be some niche usage for them, but I think in most cases you're going to probably be looking at one of the other 2 subjobs that we're going to talk about here next. And the first one is going to be Arithmetician. This job has been with us in the game for a very long time now. And, this one gives him access to some instant AoE magic abilities. It gives him access to some instant AoE healing abilities as well. For manual play, it does have a couple nice skills in CT Average and level 3 Disable. So yeah, it could be a good job for manual play, maybe for some auto farming or maybe even to get a heal off, onto your team in between the Guild War strikes. Now, Scholar is his last sub-job, and I think this one would be probably my preferred one for most situations. And that's mainly because of the Law of Geoabsorption skill. It's a skill that I love in this game. I talk about it quite often, I think, in these review videos. And the main reason is it's a third potential damage type for him with that magical strike damage. and that type of damage is very hard to mitigate. Most characters have a weakness to strike damage. The other nice thing about it is it does bypass Celes' runic capability as well. And outside of his limit burst, this is the only skill that he has that can bypass Celes' runic. So this is actually one advantage that he has over his light version, and something that you may look to use on him in some situations. The main issue I have with this skill is the long casting time on it, so that is something that you may look to address in your builds. In terms of autoplay, in terms of getting the AI to use this skill, with Jayden's high damage penetrations, that is something that could end up being an issue. So you may look to do things in your build as well in terms of propping up strike damage in order to avoid that issue as well. Nice to have this sort of flexibility here with these sub-jobs, and I think it does round out his kit a little bit better than we've seen in the past with his light version. All right, moving on into the next section, and in this case, it's not a future consideration because we do have this right now, but this is the new vision card that has come along with Jayden, and the art team is killing it on this vision card as usual. I really do love the callback to Jayden's original vision card, where he was actually sitting on that throne, and here he's actually sitting on his beach chair in kind of a similar pose. A little bit more relaxed in this version, kind of sipping on a beach cocktail here, so I do actually really love the art on this vision card. Pretty nice stats on this one, overall for a 70 cost. We have a 301 HP value, 142 magic, but notably it is actually picking up 3 agility and 55 dex, so pretty well rounded here in terms of its base stats. Now the bestowed ability for wind is going to be 10% magic and 10% missile resist, and then Jayden will also have a limited bestowed ability here for 10% area resist and another 5 missile attack. Now moving into the party buff, this is a first here for us in global, and this is a party-wide missile res penetration. And it's going to give the full 35% value. This is quite a boon for the wind element. Most of the legacy wind units are pretty lacking when it comes to missile res penetration. And this is actually going to put Jayden at 55% missile res penetration before we get into gearing. So I think this is a really nice card for Jayden to get his hands on. And like I was saying, there's no shortage of units in the wind element that could benefit from this effect. And even units like Moore and Sodali do have missile-based attacks in their kits that could really benefit from this party effect. So I do like this one quite a bit. Now, along with that missile res penetration, we are getting 10% slash resistance and a 50% acquired AP. Now, notably, just like his light version, Jayden here is not starting with very much AP at the beginning of the battle. So I do think this 50% acquired AP is very, very nice for him, and you will get a very good chunk of that even if you put this into your secondary slot. So definitely a good start for him, in terms of building up his acquired AP. Now, we do have a new weapon that has come in with Jayden as well, and this is his super soaker that we see in his limit burst, aka the hydro pump blaster. This weapon is actually a pretty big surprise for me, is it's actually matching the latest equipment that we've been seeing on the Japanese side, and that's because it's bringing 4 total passives on this weapon. The catch here though is that 3 of them apply to Summer Jayden only. So with all those passives, this item is going to be extremely powerful in his hands. It does let you invest in other things in your Trust Stone loadout and kind of give the unit even more power potential with more passives kind of building him up. Now I am highlighting the crit version here to really maximize and sort of near guarantee his crit on any unit that he hits. And I want to do that to make sure I'm always getting that 25% bonus damage, which I think is going to be pretty important with that lower end magic total that we were looking at initially. Now, even in its base form, it does have a pretty good magic value there, coming in with 151 base magic. You will get 6 accuracy and 16 crit to go along with that. Now, unfortunately, this gun does come with that -3 agility, just like some other guns we've seen in the game. So I think that just completely offsets that 3 agility we were just seeing on the vision card, which is kind of a big oof, but I think the rest of this gun, more than makes up for that, and it's worth the trade. Now, in terms of the passives here, it does get a standard missile attack here that we would come to expect, but adding on to that, Jayden is going to be getting 30% reaction block. He's getting 20 spirit penetration. These are definitely all very helpful passives for Jayden, and the dex, between the bonus that he's getting here on the gun and the vision card base stats that we were just looking at, his dex value is definitely going to be going through the roof when we put him into a mock build. And as I said, having all these passives is definitely going to let us get a little bit more creative in the Trust Stone loadout, and definitely ups the power potential, I think, and the damage potential, with the different passives that we're going to be able to look at. All right, so here is the mock build that I've put together for Jayden. Now, I don't really have any specific target in mind for this week for this unit, but I was thinking, this build could probably work pretty well against a dark team or a lightning team. With the damage penetrations that Jayden has, even a unit like Charlotte does have a pretty rough time mitigating this version of Jayden's damage. And that really has been borne out so far in my limited testing with this unit. He has done significant damage to pretty much any tank that I throw at him. But looking at the equipment equipment that I have here, I am using that new Hydro Pump Blaster that we just talked about. I think this one, at least until we get the +6 Quasar, is definitely a no-brainer option to use for him. And, even when we do get that new version of Quasar, I think this item is always going to be extremely good for him. Now, along with that gun, I am using Terra's Ribbon here. Now, you could look at other options. You could look at something like the Diamond Code. You get a couple of nice passives, with that item. But I was looking here to maximize Jayden's damage potential. And the passives that come on the Diamond Code are ones that I can get at a little bit of a lesser value on the Trust Stones, and I do have room for that. And the Human Killer that I am getting on Terra's Ribbon here, is just something that I can't get on a Trust Stone. So I think if you're really looking to max out his damage, this is the way to go. Now, some other potential options that you could be looking at here for his equipment, you could be looking to maybe play around with his movement a little bit in autoplay. And for that, you could use something like Producer's Bow Tie or the Tourmaline Ring. Now, for a TMR, I am using Lara's Backpack, and I do really like the effect on this one for him. And I do really like the effect on this one because this will allow him to increase his range. It has 2 casts on it, and getting him up to a +3 will allow him to go toe for toe, in terms of maximum range with his light version. Now, this TMR does come with a second effect, and that is a 35 bonus crit damage. And with this unit's immense dex and sort of the additional crit that we've equipped on him here, he is critting, almost automatically. So having that extra damage at his fingertips is very, very good. Now, other options you could look at here, you could look at Ziz's Bells, of course, if AP is an issue, or maybe go a little bit more defensively with something like Ryryu's TMR for that re-raise effect. And then, of course, remember, he does have his own TMR if you really wanted to maximize the missile res penetration. So really, there's a lot of great options there, as is the case with pretty much every unit. All right, for his Esper here, I am opting to use Tetrasulfid, and again, I'm looking to maximize my damage here with Jayden. And this one is going to give him a 40 modifier on his attacks. It has a 25 wind and 15 missile attack. You do actually pick up a decent amount of accuracy here as well. Now, in my view, as we sort of talked about so far in the build, getting those increased modifiers is the best way to go to increase Jayden's damage potential. Again, as we were talking about in the stats overview, his base magic is not the greatest we've ever seen, so kind of investing heavily into magic up bonuses, I don't think is the best way to go. Now, moving into the vision cards, in terms of the wind element, it is actually very easy to set up my trifecta here. And that's because Sadali's vision card is bringing 2 of those 3 effects. It has that 15% agility. It has the 20% area resist all in one. Quite an amazing card. Now, for the single target resistance here in the build, there is a couple of options actually for wind, but I am opting for Lucia's Test Subjects card here on June. Now, it does come with only 12 single target resistance on there, but it does have 25 missile attack, which will be great for upping Jayden's damage even further. Now, sort of rounding out the defensive effects here, I do bring the Downtime Vision card on Sadali, and I do always like that one in wind builds. It has a nice mix of slash resist and HP on it. All right, now offensively on the vision cards, I am bringing Jayden's new vision card here that we talked about. In his sub slot, I am using Moore's vision card, and that's for that magical human killer that it has. I do have the Arimon vision card there on the secondary slot of June, and that has a hefty dex bonus on top of it, which is a very helpful stat for Jayden. Moving down now into the Trust Stone loadouts. And again, this is definitely more of a generic build here on this one. So I have my standard defensive set up here. I have that slash and magic res. I have the all attack and elemental debuff resistance. And then I have the HP and luck there on the 3rd stone. Now, if you were looking to rely more on Jayden's 100% hit ability, you could actually move this set to an HP set in lieu of luck. Luck, though, does have a very small increase in the damage scaling for Jayden, as well as the accuracy bonus, of course. So I do actually like that particular set in an all-around build for Jayden. Moving on to the offensive side here, and I already have so many passives covered on my weapons, so I do have some nice flexibility here on this side. So I am bringing the acquired AP as well as the wind attack here. Adding to that, I have magic up and missile res penetration. And then to really maximize my crit potential, I am bringing in that crit percentage and crit damage there on the 3rd stone. Now, he is already going to have very good crit potential, with the very high dex that he's able to get. So that crit percentage is one that you could maybe look at trading out. Other nice options could be strike attack, to help his Law of Geo skill, or maybe just go for magic attack, if you just wanted to help his arithmetician subjob. It sort of depends on the build and what you're actually trying to achieve. Now, I am tying all the passives here on the right into an agility set to sort of push up his speed and really try to maximize that. But other good options here could be an accuracy set if you really were worried about evade units sort of exploiting you and you wanted your AoE damage to be able to hit them as well. I think another great option for this unit could be an AP set. So, he does have some expensive skills, so any additional acquired AP you can build in there can definitely make a substantial difference. All right, so here are the stats for the builds. You know, the HP on this one definitely isn't looking all that great. You know, he's coming in at less than 8,000. He does have some all right resistances in the builds, so I think he'll definitely be able to take, you know, one, you know, maybe two hits, you know, depending on who's coming at him. His magic, though, as you can see, is very, very low at coming in at less than 1,100. I do think, though, that we are making up for that in a big way, you know, in terms of some of the additional modifiers that we've brought into the builds, but also in terms of the high penetration values that he's going to have, you know, before any buffs come in. You know, he's going to be looking at 65% missile res penetration and 60% spirit pen. So the damage that he does have there is going to be very difficult to mitigate. Now, Dex obviously is the star here, coming in at over 700 here in the builds. You know, most range units that I build are typically in the 550, you know, maybe up to 6 or 650 dexterity. So that additional dex here that Jayden has, you know, pushing over 700, you can actually consider that, you know, a rough equivalent to maybe 30 to 50 magic, you know, in terms of his damage scaling. So it definitely does have that benefit for him as well, you know, in addition to already giving him that crit potential and accuracy bonus that it brings. Speaking of accuracy, though, you know, he does end up at 314 here in the build. I think that's decent enough, you know, for maybe more lighter evade units that haven't invested into it too heavily. You know, I think that is going to be enough to hit them. Any sort of heavier evade builds, you know, coming from maybe a light or earth elements, you know, he's definitely going to struggle there. And in that case, if you wanted all of his attacks, including his large AoEs, to be able to hit them, I think you would want to be able to bring his accuracy up to maybe a 390 or better level to sort of have a very good chance of being able to hit them. You know, so cater the build, you know, towards what you need and sort of the targets that you're going against. But I do think this is a good place to start in terms of, you know, maximizing his damage potential, especially. So what is my verdict here on Jayden? You know, first and foremost, you know, that limit burst that we talked about, I think is one of the scariest things about him. As we've seen with Kayn in the past, area of effect slow can be devastating to a team. I think it is powerful enough even to turn the tide in a battle against an ice counterpick team, if you're able to line up multiple units in the area of effect. Now, Jayden, just like his light version before him, is bringing in that magic missile damage combination, but this time he has those large diamond area effects to go along with it. Now, we know from experience that that sort of damage isn't the easiest to mitigate against either. And even if you were able to mitigate it with high missile resistance or high spirit, Jayden is just going to cut and pierce right through that, which makes him especially powerful. So in order to mitigate this guy, you're definitely going to need to look towards things like area resist or single target resist, elemental resist, of course, and then shell or barriers. Now, speaking of shell or barriers, you know, that is definitely one of the holes here for Jayden that can be exploited. He has no utility there to be able to break or dispel those, so it could definitely be an important thing to bring elsewhere in your party in order to complement Jayden. Now, as we talked a little bit about earlier, Jayden is also severely lacking when it comes to his defensive potential, and he is very much a glass cannon like many other missile units before him. Sadly, though, you know, this version of Jayden, he does not have any version of reflex to be able to fall back on and bail him out. Now, as we've talked about several times here in the video today, Jayden's innate magic totals are definitely on the lower end of the spectrum. Now, I do think that that is something that can be overcome, you know, in your team build, and something that I tried to do in my mock build as well. But you definitely need to be cognizant of that and making sure you're building in the right areas in order to prop up his damage. Another issue for this unit that I see is that he has no way to increase his range innately, so he just comes with that +2 range in his passives. So that will put him at a slight disadvantage against maybe some other missile units out there who are able to push their range up to maybe a +3 or a +4. So I think if that was something of concern for you and your build and sort of the map that you were playing on, you would want to look to bring that in as an external buff, you know, either from a TMR or from a teammate. Having that additional range definitely helps keep him further back and away from the line of fire, so it is very important for a unit like this. One other thing to keep in mind with this unit is his AP. You know, he does come with a very low amount of AP when he starts the battle, and the cost of his skills is very high, even with the AP consumption decrease that he has. So definitely another thing to keep in mind when you're building him. You want to make sure he has that acquired AP, maybe even resort to using something like Z's Bells if you had to. At the end of the day, though, you know, I think this is going to be a very difficult unit to deal with if he's played properly and put behind a stout tank to sort of deflect the action away from him and sort of keep him back at a range to be able to do his thing. I do think, though, that, you know, after that slow is gone, you know, maybe if it's a second Guild Wars strike, this unit is definitely much less dangerous overall without having that debuff at his disposal. At the very least, though, you know, his large AoE damage, you know, and his high penetrations, you know, sent from a long range, I think are very difficult to deal with, you know, even for a counterpick like the ice element. So something to keep in mind. All right, guys, so that is my look into Summer Jayden. You know, is he as powerful as his light version? I'm not quite sure on that yet. I think the potential is there that he could at least rival him and be maybe just as good. I do think that this version maybe trades out some of that pure magic potency to have access to a large area of effect, and in addition, the super high penetrations that he has. And I will say those penetrations are definitely no joke, and his damage definitely ends up pretty nice in all of the testing that I've done so far. Now, wind is a very strong element on global overall right now. They've gotten a lot of new units and vision cards this year. And I think the wind element at large, does have some interesting tools to sort of prop Jayden up and make him even better. Sodali is definitely one that comes to mind. He has that missile imperil that he likes to break out from time to time. And we do actually have Glaciella coming down the pipe as well, and she has a wind imperil in her kit. So I think there's definitely some nice synergy angles there that could be leveraged, and I think it has the potential to make this unit even better in the future. I do also really love the potential of completely shutting down a team with Jayden, bringing in his area of effect slow. You could then have Sodali coming in right after that, dropping the CT, dropping the agility massively, and I think that is just a nasty combo for pretty much any mode of play. It definitely makes it very, very easy to pull off a double turn and just turn the tide and win the game right there. So I think with those things in mind, I do view this as a very nice addition to the Wind roster. What are you guys thinking though out there in terms of Summer Jayden? Have you already pulled him and started building him? Do you already have him at 120? Or were you sort of waiting for the dust to settle and see what the consensus was on this unit before you decided to pull? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.